regard for privacy. I think everybody here understands that they were very private individuals and a very private family.
Forensic examinations and investigations from Santa Fe Sheriff's Office in Santa Fe have concluded the above information, dismissing speculations regarding the couple being murdered or poisoned by carbon monoxide. The New Mexico office of the medical examiner determined that the couple passed away 7 days apart, meaning Gene Hackman died on February 18 while his wife passed away around February 11, and they remained undiscovered until the afternoon of February 26. This means Hackman lived in that house for 7 days with the body of his wife gradually decomposing. So what really happened in that house? What did Hackman do during that time, attempting to conceal his wife's death, trying to dispose of the body, or is there a reason we don't yet know? Let's explore that in today's video. One strange disappearance. Hackman is not a strange name to movie lovers. With 2 Oscars and a series of iconic roles, he was once considered one of Hollywood's greatest actors, but he was also known for his private life. His wife, Betsy Arakawa, also lived a similar life. She was once a promising pianist capable of pursuing a brilliant music career, but after marrying Hackman, she chose to step back, living a simple life indifferent to the glitz of Hollywood. The couple settled in Santa Fe, New Mexico, a peaceful place separated from the bustle of the entertainment world. They chose to live in a modest house amidst dusty dirt roads and endless mountain ranges, where the sun shone every day and silence enveloped everything. They shunned the press, did not maintain contact with the artistic community, nor did they update their personal lives on social media. They enjoyed their old age together in solitude, but they did not know that this isolation would become the cause of one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking stories. On February 11, Betsy Arakawa was last seen when she stopped by a local grocery store. Employees there noticed nothing unusual about her. She calmly shopped, chatting cheerfully with the cashier as if it were just another normal day. No one could have imagined that it was the last time she would appear in public. After returning home, she completely disappeared from the sight of those around her. From that moment on, no one saw Betsy Arakawa again. But strangely, a day later, on February 13, neighbors still saw Gene Hackman walking on the land near his house, a 90-year-old man with snow-white hair walking slowly in the peaceful space of Santa Fe. That image was nothing unusual because Hackman often walked alone in the days before. But what was special was that after this appearance, no one saw Hackman again. No one saw him go outside, no one heard any noise from his house. What really happened during those days? Why did Betsy suddenly disappear, and why did Hackman, a man still in the habit of walking around, suddenly stop leaving the house? An even bigger question arises when one remembers that Hackman was an elderly man suffering from mild Alzheimer's. According to his daughter, Hackman had shown signs of memory decline in recent years. He often forgot minor things, occasionally confused times and places, but was still able to live independently thanks to Betsy's care. Therefore, when both disappeared from everyone's sight, many hypotheses were put forward. Could it be that Hackman fell into a state of confusion after losing the wife who was always by his side? Could it be that he didn't realize the reality that she had passed away? And what happened inside that house for 7 days without anyone knowing? Before delving into Gene Hackman's story, we need to update the latest information regarding the reason for his wife's death. Yesterday, when the final forensic report was released, a shocking truth was revealed. Betsy Arakawa passed away due to hantavirus infection, a rare virus concentrated in certain western U.S. states such as New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. This result not only helps determine the cause of Betsy's death but also opens up a completely different perspective on the events that occurred in Hackman's house. Hantavirus is a virus originating from rodents, mainly spread through the excrement of mice and other wild animals. When humans accidentally disturb an environment containing this virus, such as when cleaning old storage areas, bedding, or areas with mouse droppings, virus particles can become airborne and easily enter the body through the respiratory system. Initially, the symptoms of the disease resemble a common flu, but when the condition becomes serious, the virus attacks the lungs, causing rapid respiratory failure. The mortality rate for people infected with this virus ranges from 30% to 50%, meaning that for every 2 people infected, at least 1 does not survive. What makes this result even more noteworthy is that Hackman tested completely negative for hantavirus. This means that although the couple lived together in the same house, in daily contact, only Betsy was infected. This finding raises many questions. How was Betsy infected with the virus? Did she come into contact with mouse droppings or other sources of infection in the house without realizing it? And more importantly, could it be that Hackman witnessed his wife's decline but did not understand the severity of the situation due to his own medical condition? Looking back at the time before Betsy passed away, it is noted that she was still functioning normally. Her last public appearance was on February 11 when she went shopping at a local store. There were no signs that she was feeling unwell, nor were there any reports of her seeking medical attention. However, it is concerning that the symptoms of hantavirus often appear late, initially resembling only a mild fever, causing many people to mistake it for a common cold. If Betsy had been infected earlier without knowing, then it is possible that upon returning home, her condition rapidly worsened without anyone realizing. Another possibility is that Betsy came into contact with the virus unknowingly in the last days of her life. If she had been cleaning the storage room, rearranging bedding, or in contact with any area likely to contain the virus, then infection is entirely possible. When symptoms began to appear, Hackman very likely did not recognize the severity of the situation. For someone with Alzheimer's, monitoring the health signs of a loved one can become extremely difficult. If Betsy gradually weakened over a few days, Hackman may not have been able to distinguish between a common cold and a potentially fatal illness. As the illness progresses to a critical stage, the hantavirus can cause the lungs to fill with fluid, leading to rapid respiratory failure in patients. If Betsy suddenly fell into this condition while at home, the likelihood of her losing consciousness and passing away within a few hours is very high. If Hackman was beside her at that moment, he may not have understood what was happening. Alzheimer's makes patients prone to confusion in unexpected situations, and in this case, Hackman may not have realized that his wife had passed away. This could explain why he didn't call for emergency services or seek help, simply because, in his mind, she was just sleeping. After February 13, the home of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa fell into a strange state, an absolute silence so profound that no one in the Santa Fe neighborhood noticed anything unusual was happening. For neighbors, the couple's absence was not surprising. Hackman and Betsy were known for their reclusive lifestyle, rarely interacting with outsiders. No missing person report was filed, no one questioned their absence. But it was this very silence that was the first sign of a tragedy that the world would only realize the severity of on February 26, when police entered the house. To understand what happened during those 7 days, it's necessary to consider Hackman's mental and physical condition. At 90 years old, he suffered from mild Alzheimer's, a neurodegenerative disease affecting memory and the ability to perceive reality. Studies on Alzheimer's indicate that sufferers can fall into a cognitive loop, in which they continue to repeat familiar actions without realizing changes in their surrounding environment. Hackman may have woken up each day, walked around the house, talked to Betsy, and prepared meals for her without ever realizing that she had passed away. This hypothesis is reinforced by what police found when they entered the house: a glass of water still untouched on the table, a book left open on the sofa, and traces indicating Hackman was still living as usual. In particular, the bed where Betsy lay was still neatly made, showing no signs of disarray, and the blanket was still carefully pulled up. This raises a crucial question: was Hackman aware that his wife was deceased, or did he still believe she was just asleep? People with early-stage Alzheimer's often have the ability to maintain daily routines without consciously being aware of them. For example, they may continue to clear the table, pour water, or even talk to someone who has passed away without realizing the reality. If this hypothesis is correct, Hackman may have spent 7 days beside Betsy, believing she was still alive. His failure to seek outside help may not have been because he didn't want to, but because, in his mind, nothing unusual had occurred at all. However, Alzheimer's does not only impair memory, it also causes hallucinations. Many patients in the later stages can see or hear things that are not real. They may believe that loved ones are still talking to them even though, in reality, that person has passed away. This raises an even more chilling hypothesis: perhaps Hackman not only forgot reality, but in his mind, Betsy was still present, still talking to him, still a part of his daily life. If that were true, it could explain why he didn't seek help, simply because in the world his mind created, nothing needed to change at all. But there is also another possibility, more heartbreaking yet also more realistic. Alzheimer's does not completely erase a person's awareness immediately. Perhaps, in rare moments of lucidity, Hackman did realize that Betsy was no longer alive. Maybe he tried to touch her, tried to wake her up, but when there was no response, he fell into a state of confusion and panic. People with this disease often tend to live in the past when they cannot process the present. If Hackman truly had a moment of clarity and realized that his wife had passed away, his reaction might have been to retreat completely from reality, a common psychological defense mechanism in elderly patients with cognitive impairment. Not knowing how to face reality, he may have chosen to ignore it, continuing to live as if everything was normal. When police entered the house on February 18, they noted no signs of struggle or violence. Everything was neat and tidy, with no indication of any unusual incident. But it was this very stillness that was most unsettling. The house was like a space trapped in time. Objects seemed to be exactly where they should be, as if nothing had changed in the past week. Dust began to settle on some surfaces, indicating that no one had been cleaning or living normally in recent days. One small but crucial detail: Hackman's walking stick was lying right near the front door. This suggests that there may have been a moment during those days when Hackman tried to open the door to go outside, but then, for some reason, he couldn't. Was that the moment he became aware of the situation, tried to leave the house, but no longer had the strength? Or did Alzheimer's make him forget why he was standing there even before the door opened? But the most noteworthy detail was the 3 dogs in the house. 2 were alive, but 1 was dead, and its location left the police stunned. It was found inside a closet, a place no dog could lock itself into. This leads to 2 hypotheses. Hypothesis 1: Hackman, in a moment of lost awareness due to Alzheimer's, accidentally locked the dog in the closet and then forgot it was there. People with Alzheimer's often tend to confuse objects and their actions. Perhaps Hackman mistook the dog for another object or simply forgot that he had closed the closet door. Hypothesis 2: the dog sought a place to hide because of something that frightened it. Studies on animals show that dogs can sense changes in their surrounding environment, especially when someone passes away. They may react by barking incessantly or, in some cases, finding a secluded place to hide. Could this dog have sensed something unusual during those days and accidentally become trapped in a closet? The remaining 2 dogs, when found by police, did not react in a normal way. They did not bark, did not run to greet strangers, but just stood quietly observing everything. This could be a sign of prolonged stress. They may have witnessed the entire event but had no way to express it. The dogs are the only remaining witnesses in that house. They saw how Hackman lived during those 7 days, saw how he reacted to Betsy's passing, but they cannot speak. Perhaps Hackman talked to them as he usually did. Perhaps he sat there, stroking them while still believing that Betsy was sleeping peacefully in bed. Perhaps in a fleeting moment, when Alzheimer's no longer held his mind captive, he understood the truth, and it was that very moment that broke him down. Something few consider is that Hackman himself may have experienced a mental breakdown during those 7 days. When faced with the death of a loved one, a person's reaction can be to freeze emotionally, not because they don't feel pain, but because they are unable to process it. For someone with Alzheimer's, the ability to process emotional shocks is severely impaired. It's possible Hackman had a moment of realizing the truth, but then his mind automatically pushed him into a state of ignoring to protect himself. This is similar to cases recorded in elderly Alzheimer's patients. After losing a loved one, they may completely disregard the loss as if it never happened. Whatever the hypothesis, one thing is certain: Hackman spent those 7 days in a loop of distorted reality, between oblivion, hallucinations, and helplessness. What truly transpired in his mind may never be known, but the traces in the house suggest that he was not simply a man unaware of what had happened. Perhaps he knew, but Alzheimer's rendered him unable to do anything else. Or perhaps his mind had built a world where Betsy was still alive, and in that world, nothing needed to change. Gene Hackman was finally found collapsed right in front of his house, beside the walking stick he had always relied on in his final years. A delivery person accidentally discovered him lying motionless on the floor and immediately called the police. Was that the moment Hackman finally realized the truth? Could it be that after 7 days of living in a distorted reality, Alzheimer's could no longer shield him from the loneliness present in that house? The prolonged silence may not have made him fully aware of Betsy's death, but the feeling of missing something important could still have crept into his mind. Alzheimer's can make a person forget the names of loved ones, forget life events, but it cannot completely erase the most primal emotions: emptiness, loneliness, the feeling of loss. Perhaps Hackman began to sense something was wrong. Perhaps he walked to the door, picked up his stick, tried to open it, to find someone, to escape the silence enveloping him, but he was not strong enough. The walking stick lying right beside Hackman is not just a simple object but also crucial evidence of his final moments. Police noted it was not placed in a corner of the house or near a table but lying close to him, as if he had just used it before falling. A 90-year-old man, already weak and with a history of cognitive impairment, would not move much without reason. Could that have been a rare moment of lucidity when Hackman realized that Betsy was no longer beside him? Perhaps when he no longer heard her voice, no longer saw her presence in the house, he felt something was amiss. But that realization came too late, and his body was no longer strong enough to do anything. Another important factor to consider is how Hackman was found. When police arrived, they found him not on the bed or on a chair but right in front of the main door near the exit, meaning he had tried to leave the house but, for some reason, couldn't. If Alzheimer's had made him completely unaware of reality, why would he feel the need to leave? It suggests that at some point during those 7 days, something made him feel he could no longer stay in that house. Perhaps it was the fear of realizing Betsy would not wake up, or perhaps it was survival instinct as his body had begun to weaken due to lack of proper care. Whatever the reason, the traces at the scene show that he had tried to go outside, a desperate act in the final moments of his life. There's another hypothesis. Alzheimer's not only impairs memory but also affects the ability to control the body. In the late stages of the disease, patients may experience disorientation episodes where they suddenly feel panicked for no apparent reason. Some patients describe this feeling as extreme anxiety, making them feel like they have to go somewhere immediately, even without knowing the destination. If Hackman experienced such a moment, he might have suddenly tried to stand up and go to the door but lacked the strength to do so. This could explain why he was found collapsed right in front of the door, as if he had been exhausted in the process of trying to get out. Another crucial factor in this context is the absence of any signs that Hackman attempted to contact anyone. The phone in the house remained in place with no outgoing calls during those 7 days. This could be due to two reasons: either Hackman was not aware of the situation, or he was aware but no longer capable of using the phone. Studies on Alzheimer's show that as the disease progresses to a certain stage, patients may forget how to use familiar devices even if they have used them thousands of times before. This means Hackman might have had a moment of realizing he needed help, but when he looked at the phone, he couldn't remember how to dial or even understand what the phone was for. If this is true, then Hackman's final moments are even more heartbreaking. He might have wanted to call for help, tried to, but was trapped in his own cognitive decline. All these factors lead to a tragic conclusion. It's possible that throughout those 7 days, Hackman did not truly understand that Betsy had passed away, but his body and subconscious still sensed her absence. Perhaps when the feeling of loneliness and unease became overwhelming, he tried to leave the house but couldn't, and when his body could no longer endure, he collapsed right in front of the door beside his stick in a final attempt to escape the isolation that was suffocating him. That moment was not just the moment Hackman died, but also the moment he perhaps truly felt the void that Alzheimer's had hidden from him for the previous 7 days. His death did not come suddenly. It was the result of a prolonged decline, of isolation, of a reality distorted by a disease he could not control. Most importantly, it was a death no one witnessed, no one discovered until it was too late. If not for the delivery person who happened to come by, Hackman might have lain there for many more days, unnoticed, a death in oblivion, a heartbreaking end for a legend once admired by the whole world. Gene Hackman was once one of the greatest actors of the 20th century, a screen legend with a series of iconic roles. He once stood before millions of viewers, received countless rounds of applause, and twice ascended the stage of the Oscars. But as the curtain of his life gradually closed, no one seemed to care about him anymore. After leaving Hollywood, Hackman disappeared from public view, living a quiet life with his wife in a small house in Santa Fe. And then tragedy struck. After Betsy passed away, Hackman lived in solitude for 7 days, without a single phone call, without anyone knocking on the door. When he collapsed right in front of his house, it wasn't a relative or a friend who discovered him, but a stranger, a delivery person. Is that a fitting end for one of the greatest movie legends, or is it a sign of a larger problem, the oblivion and indifference that society reserves for the elderly? In those 7 days, no one realized Hackman had vanished, no friends called to check in, no one visited his house, neighbors continued with their lives, no one wondering why Hackman was no longer seen walking as before. Those who had collaborated with him in the entertainment industry had no reason to care about a man who had left the industry 2 decades prior. When the police finally entered the house, they found no signs that Hackman had contacted anyone in recent days, no outgoing calls, no messages, no emails. He had no social media accounts, no one to text or post a status seeking help. He was trapped completely in silence, and no one noticed. This is not just the story of an individual but also the story of millions of elderly people around the world, those who once shone brightly but are then forgotten by the world when they no longer possess their former glory. Hackman's death is a tragedy, but what is even more heartbreaking is that it is not an isolated event. In modern society, isolation is increasingly becoming a serious problem for the elderly. When we are young, we live in a world full of connections, friends, colleagues, family, but as old age arrives, as loved ones pass away one by one, as careers no longer keep us in the world of work, many begin to fall into a state of being forgotten. Hackman is not the only one facing this. How many other legends have had to endure loneliness in their final years? How many people once stood under bright spotlights but then passed away quietly, unnoticed by anyone? After news of Hackman's death spread, Hollywood was shaken. Old colleagues, directors, and actors who had worked with him expressed their condolences. Articles praising his career flooded newspapers, but all of this came too late. None of those people had called Hackman in his final years, none of them wondered how he was living, whether he needed help. The world only remembered him when he was no longer alive. This reveals a bitter reality about how society treats the elderly. When we are young, we live in a world full of connections, friends, colleagues, family, but as old age arrives, as loved ones pass away one by one, as careers no longer keep us in the world of work, many begin to fall into a state of being forgotten. Hackman is not the only one facing this. How many other legends have had to endure loneliness in their final years? How many people once stood under bright spotlights but then passed away quietly, unnoticed by anyone? After news of Hackman's death spread, Hollywood was shaken. Old colleagues, directors, and actors who had worked with him expressed their condolences. Articles praising his career flooded newspapers, but all of this came too late. None of those people had called Hackman in his final years, none of them wondered how he was living, whether he needed help. The world only remembered him when he was no longer alive. This reveals a bitter reality about how society treats the elderly. When a person is at the peak of their career, they are surrounded by thousands of people, but when they no longer have anything to contribute, nothing more to give, they are gradually pushed to the margins. It's not just movie stars, ordinary people are also facing this problem. How many elderly people are living alone, with no one to talk to, no one to rely on? How many will pass away without anyone knowing until days later? Hackman's story is not just a wake-up call about isolation in modern society, but also raises questions about our responsibility. Are we caring enough for our loved ones around us? How many people we know are living in loneliness without us even realizing it? Society's indifference not only kills people like Hackman, but it is also a sign of a deeper problem, a world gradually losing the genuine connection between people. If someone had called Hackman sooner, would things have been different? If a neighbor had noticed his absence, could he have been helped before it was too late? If someone had remembered him before he collapsed right in front of his door, could this tragedy have been avoided? No one has the answers, but one thing is certain: if society does not change, if people do not start caring for each other more, then many more Gene Hackmans will spend their final days in solitude, unnoticed by anyone. And when that happens, who will be responsible? After decades immersed in the glory of fame, Hackman made a decision that few could have predicted. He completely left Hollywood, refusing all public attention, and lived a reclusive life disconnected from the world. His sudden disappearance from the silver screen in 2004 shocked the entertainment industry. A man who had conquered millions of audiences now chose a secluded life, leaving no trace in the media. One of the most important pieces of evidence comes from the testimonies of neighbors living near Hackman's mansion. According to them, on the night before Hackman and his wife were discovered deceased, strange noises came from the house. Some witnesses described it as a loud thud, as if something had fallen to the floor, while others claimed to have heard sounds like an argument or even faint screams. It's worth noting that these sounds occurred around 11 p.m., a time when, according to acquaintances, Hackman was usually already asleep. Medical examiners have completed the autopsy process and discovered some anomalies on the bodies of Hackman and his wife. Specifically, both bodies showed signs of partial mummification, an unusual phenomenon if they had only passed away within a week. This leads investigators to question, why didn't anyone realize that Hackman and his wife had passed away sooner? Did someone intentionally slow down the decomposition process to conceal the true time of death? In addition, the autopsy results showed no signs of serious trauma on Hackman's body, which strengthens the hypothesis that the cause of death may be a factor that leaves no external traces, such as poisoning or suffocation. One of the hypotheses that police are considering is the possibility of Hackman being poisoned. To clarify this, tissue samples from Hackman's body have been sent to the laboratory to check for any traces of poison in his blood. If the presence of a dangerous poison is found, this would be the most important evidence to determine whether the incident was a staged murder. However, the most shocking detail comes from the traces found under Hackman's fingernails. Forensic doctors discovered suspicious signs of a struggle or scuffle before his death. Small scratches on his fingernails could be the result of Hackman trying to defend himself, or they might indicate that he was clutching something before losing consciousness. Currently, DNA samples from Hackman's fingernails are being analyzed to determine if anyone else had direct contact with him at the time of the incident. If the test results show the presence of a foreign DNA trace, it would completely change the direction of the investigation. Besides the forensic findings, Hackman's financial records are also a major focus in the investigation. With assets worth millions of dollars, Hackman could have become a target for those with financial motives. One of the biggest questions now is whether Hackman made any changes to his will before his death. If he intended to adjust inheritance rights, this could affect who would benefit and who would be excluded from the list of heirs. This could be a potential motive for murder if someone had planned to seize his assets. Not only focusing on the testament, police are also reviewing Hackman's recent financial transactions to look for any unusual signs. Did someone withdraw a large sum of money from his account? Did Hackman make a suspicious investment before his death? One noteworthy point is that there is information suggesting Hackman was in the process of considering selling some of his real estate. If this information is accurate, the question is, who would benefit from these assets after his death, and did someone plan to take advantage of this? All of these details not only complicate the case further but also force the public to ask many questions. Were Hackman and Betsy really just victims of a personal tragedy, or is there a conspiracy behind it? Why were there strange noises on the night of the incident? Who benefited most from Hackman's death? Was someone present in the house at the time of his death that the police have not yet discovered? The investigation is still ongoing, and with each new piece of evidence found, the case seems to add another layer of mystery. This is no longer just the story of a forgotten movie legend, but could be a sophisticated murder case, a truth hidden behind 7 days of haunting silence. Hackman's case is still under investigation, and each new piece of evidence raises more questions than answers. If there are any latest developments, we will update you as soon as information becomes available. What do you think really happened in Gene Hackman's house? Is this a concealed murder case or simply a lonely tragedy of an old man? Leave your opinion in the comments below. 6 new developments in the case, latest updates on this case. And if you like mystery stories, hit the notification bell to always be the first to watch the next videos. See you in the next episodes, where the mysteries will continue to be revealed.